She scrubbed their silver for 3 months, while quietly holding the fate of their empire in her hands. The Mafia wife invited her to the charity gala as a live exhibit of the poor, not knowing she had just invited a world-renowned billionaire ready to burn her social standing to the ground. For 90 days, Antoinette G. Stuckey played the part of the invisible servant in the Sun household, hands in dishwater, eyes averted, soul untouched. One Myung-Ok treated her like a footstool. The elite guests saw only a uniform and a name tag. No one realized they were being evaluated by the woman who could make or break their $200 million merger. Until the invitation hit the dirty floor. A high society gala. A calculated attempt to humiliate her. The perfect trap. Because the lowly maid they intended to mock was about to arrive in a custom red gown and heirloom diamonds, to reclaim her throne and execute a social lesson they would never forget. Antoinette G. Stuckey sat at the long, mahogany servant's table in the dim light of the kitchen, a pile of tarnished silver spread before her. To any observer, she was merely a woman in a faded uniform, her movements rhythmic and tireless as she rubbed a heavy candelabra with a polishing cloth. But behind her calm, dark eyes, a mind trained at the highest levels of global finance was calculating more than just the shine on the metal. Every smudge of grease she removed was a data point. Every conversation echoing from the dining room was a fiscal report. The heavy double doors swung open, hitting the stopper with a violent thud. One Myung-Ok marched in, the sharp click of her stiletto heels sounding like gunfire against the tile. She didn't look at Antoinette's face, she never did. Instead, she reached down with a gloved hand and swiped a finger across the base of the silver tray Antoinette had just finished. Still dull, Myung-Ok spat, flicking her hand as if she had touched something diseased. I suppose I shouldn't expect brilliance from someone whose only talent is manual labor. Do you even know what this tray is worth, Antoinette? It's more than you'll earn in 3 lifetimes of scrubbing. Antoinette didn't flinch. She kept her head bowed, her voice a soft, practiced murmur. It is a rare Georgian piece, ma'am. I am taking extra care with the filigree. Myung-Ok let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Listen to you. Trying to sound educated. It's pathetic, really. You can memorize the names of things, but you'll always just be the help. She leaned in closer, the scent of her expensive, cloying perfume stifling the air. My husband thinks this merger will bring new perspectives to the company. I told him he's being soft. Some people are born to lead, and others are born to serve. Make sure you remember which one you are before the guests arrive. As Myung-Ok swept out of the room, Antoinette finally looked up. Her reflection in the polished silver tray was no longer distorted by tarnish. It was sharp, clear, and lethal. She wasn't just evaluating the Sun family's assets anymore, she was evaluating their souls. She had seen the way the other maids trembled when Myung-Ok entered a room, and how the junior staff were denied even basic breaks. The data was clear. Sun Chan-wook's empire was built on a foundation of structural cruelty, fueled by his wife's unchecked ego. Antoinette picked up a heavy silver spoon and turned it over in her hand. Myung-Ok was right about one thing, Antoinette knew exactly what the tray was worth. She also knew exactly what it would cost the Sun family when she decided to pull the plug on their $200 million lifeline. The test was over. The verdict was recorded. Now, it was time for the execution. The following morning, the atmosphere in the Sun mansion was thick with the scent of lilies and the frantic energy of event planners. Antoinette was stationed in the grand conservatory, meticulously wiping the leaves of exotic ferns, when the sound of shrill, performative laughter announced Myung-Ok's arrival. She wasn't alone. Trailing behind her were 2 women draped in logos and heavy gold, their eyes scanning the room with the practiced boredom of the ultra-wealthy. Myung-Ok stopped just a few feet from Antoinette, gesturing toward her as if she were a new piece of sculpture. And this is Antoinette, Myung-Ok said, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that made the other women snicker. She's been with us for 3 months, and I must say, she has the most remarkable constitution for labor. She never tires, no matter how much I give her. One of the friends leaned in, peering at Antoinette through oversized sunglasses. She's quite sturdy, isn't she? It must be fascinating to have someone so close to the earth in the house. Myung-Ok's eyes gleamed with a sudden, malicious spark. Actually, I had a divine idea this morning. Girls, you know my Humanity in Service Gala is this Saturday? I've decided to invite Antoinette as our special guest of honor. She turned to Antoinette, a thin, cruel smile stretching across her face. What do you think, Antoinette? A night among the stars. I'll even let you have the evening off from the kitchen, provided you show up in your best clothes. I want everyone to see the face of the hands that keep this house running. The friends erupted in giggles, one of them whispering loudly about how refreshingly authentic it would be to see a maid attempting to navigate a ballroom. They saw a punchline. They saw a woman who would likely show up in a Sunday church dress, fumbling with a salad fork while they looked on in amusement. Antoinette didn't let the emerald green leaf in her hand tremble. She stood slowly, smoothing her apron, and met Myung-Ok's gaze with a look of profound, terrifying humility. A charity gala, ma'am? I wouldn't want to impose on such an elite gathering. Nonsense, Myung-Ok waved a hand dismissively, already turning back to her friends. I insist. It's for a good cause, after all. Wear something memorable. I want to make sure no one misses you. I understand perfectly, ma'am, Antoinette replied, her voice steady and low. I will make sure I am impossible to ignore. As the trio swept away, their laughter echoing through the glass walls of the conservatory, Antoinette reached into the pocket of her uniform. Her fingers brushed against the cool, hard edge of her encrypted titanium phone. She had spent a lifetime building an empire on the ability to read a room before she even entered it. Myung-Ok thought she was setting a trap for a mouse, unaware that she had just opened the doors of her sanctuary to a lioness. Antoinette's mind was already moving past the insult, dialing her lead stylist in Paris. The joke was about to become the most expensive mistake the Sun family ever made. Later that afternoon, a sudden crash echoed through the marble hallway of the West Wing. One of the younger kitchen staff, a girl barely 20 named Min-Ji, had tripped while carrying a crate of vintage crystal flutes for the gala. Shattered glass lay like diamonds across the floor, and the girl was already hyperventilating, her eyes darting toward the stairs in terror. She knew the rules. In this house, a mistake was a personal affront to the mistress, and the punishment was usually immediate termination without pay. Antoinette was there in seconds. She didn't scold the girl or rush to pick up the glass. Instead, she placed a firm, grounding hand on Min-Ji's shoulder. Breathe, Antoinette commanded, her voice dropping into a low, authoritative register that lacked any trace of the subservient maid. It is just glass. Go to the pantry and get the heavy-duty broom. If anyone asks, I was the one who dropped it. From the shadows of the second-floor landing, Sun Chanwook watched the scene unfold. He had been observing Antoinette for weeks, his instincts honed by years of navigating the cutthroat world of international logistics. He had noticed the way she moved, the straightness of her spine when she thought no one was looking, the way she scanned financial documents left on his desk with a professional's eye rather than a curiosity seeker's. As Min-Ji scrambled away, Antoinette knelt among the shards. She didn't look like a woman afraid of a mess. She looked like a commander clearing a battlefield. She handled the sharp remnants with a calm precision, her face a mask of unshakable poise even as one Myung-Ok's voice shrilled from the foyer, demanding to know what the clattering was about. Chanwook stepped out of the shadows, his presence heavy and silent. Antoinette didn't startle. She simply looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. In that gaze, there was no fear, no plea for mercy, only a cold, mutual recognition. The girl is clumsy, Chanwook said, his voice level. The girl is exhausted, Antoinette corrected him, standing up slowly. She didn't break eye contact. Exhaustion leads to inefficiency, Mr. Sun. A well-rested team is a profitable one. Surely a man of your standing understands the return on investment regarding human capital. Chanwook felt a chill of pure, electric confirmation. No Maid spoke of human capital or return on investment. He looked at her hands. Steady, unscarred by years of toil despite the dishwater. He realized then that he wasn't looking at a servant who had blundered into his home, he was looking at a peer who had infiltrated it. My wife thinks she is playing a game with you, Chan-wook said quietly, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Then she should learn the first rule of the game, Antoinette replied, turning back to the glass. Never underestimate the person holding the broom. They see everything you've swept under the rug. Chan-wook turned away, his mind racing. He had been looking for a reason to trust the proposed merger, to find a partner with the steel to match his own. He had found her. He wouldn't warn Myung-Ok. He wanted to see exactly how the Red Queen intended to checkmate his wife. That night, the Sun Mansion was a tomb of silent, dark corridors. Antoinette waited until the red glow of the security cameras pulsed with a rhythmic, predictable blink before she slipped out through the service entrance. She didn't run, she walked with the measured, deliberate stride of a woman who owned the ground beneath her feet. At the edge of the estate's wooded perimeter, a blacked-out executive SUV waited, its engine a low, predatory hum in the midnight air. As she stepped inside, the interior lights flickered on, revealing two men in sharp suits and a woman holding a tablet. "Good evening, Director Stuckey," her head of security whispered, handing her an encrypted device. Antoinette took it, the transition instantaneous. The Antoinette who scrubbed baseboards vanished, replaced by the Antoinette who moved markets with a single signature. "Status on the Stuckey merger due diligence," she asked, her voice regaining its crisp, transatlantic authority. "The financial records are clean, but the cultural audit is a disaster, just as you suspected," her lead analyst replied. "The turnover rate among staff is 40% higher than industry standards. It's a toxic asset." Antoinette nodded, her eyes fixed on the city skyline as they sped toward a private suite at the Riverside Hotel. "Then we aren't just here for a merger. We're here for a restructuring." In the penthouse suite, the transformation began. Her team had been preparing for weeks. On a mannequin in the center of the room hung her armor, a custom-designed gown in a shade of red so deep and vibrant it looked like a heartbeat. It was silk and structural power, designed to command a room before a single word was spoken. Beside it sat a velvet case containing the Stuckey family heirlooms, canary diamonds that had once belonged to royalty. As her stylists moved with clinical efficiency, washing away the scent of lemon oil and floor wax, Antoinette stared at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was no longer a ghost in the hallway. She was the Red Queen. She watched as they pinned the silk and polished the gems, each movement a preparation for the social execution she would perform the following night. "Myung-Ok wanted a show," Antoinette murmured as she donned a diamond necklace that cost more than the Sun family's fleet of shipping vessels. "I'm going to give her a masterpiece." By the time the sun began to peek over the horizon, Antoinette was back in her polyester uniform, slipping into her narrow servant's bed. She smelled of cheap soap once more, but beneath her pillow lay a single invitation, crumpled and stained with dishwater. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to visualize the moment the ballroom doors would swing open. The disguise was almost over. The lioness was ready. The evening air in the mansion's private garden was cool, smelling of damp earth and blooming jasmine. Antoinette stood by a stone fountain, her maid's uniform a stark contrast to the manicured luxury of the estate. She wasn't working, she was simply standing, her silhouette framed by the rising moon. When the crunch of gravel signaled Sun Chan-wook's approach, she didn't turn. She didn't have to. Chan-wook stopped a few feet away, lighting a cigarette. The orange ember flickered in the dark. "My wife has spent the last hour showing her friends the comedy she has planned for tomorrow," he said, his voice a low rumble. "She truly believes you are a victim she has curated for her own entertainment." Antoinette turned then, the moonlight catching the sharp, intelligent angles of her face. The submissive mask she wore in the kitchen had been discarded. "Your wife mistakes cruelty for power, Mr. Sun. It is a common error among those who have never had to build anything of their own." Chan-wook stepped closer, the power dynamic shifting like an incoming tide. In the boardroom, he was a predator, but here, in the presence of this woman, he felt like a student. I ran a background check on the firm representing the merger. The signatures were digital, encrypted, and untraceable. But the philosophy behind the terms, the focus on ethical sustainability, it matches the way you protected that girl yesterday. I don't just invest in companies, Chan-wook, Antoinette said, using his name for the first time without a title. The word carried the weight of an equal. I invest in environments. I came here to see if your empire was a sanctuary or a cage. I have my answer. Chan-wook looked at her, really looking at her, seeing the global powerhouse hidden beneath the polyester. And what happens tomorrow? When the cage door opens at the gala? Tomorrow, I stop observing, Antoinette replied, stepping toward him until they were mere inches apart. She didn't look up at him, she looked through him. Your wife wants a spectacle. I am going to give her a revelation. The question is, Chan-wook, where will you be standing when the floor falls out from under her? Chan-wook exhaled a cloud of smoke, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of respect and something deeper. I have spent my life surrounded by people who fear me or want something from me. You are the first person in years who has looked at me and seen a partner rather than a paycheck. He crushed his cigarette under his heel. I won't stop you. In fact, I think I'd like to see how the Red Queen handles a revolution. Then stay close, Antoinette whispered, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. It's going to be the most expensive lesson she's ever learned. The Riverside Hotel ballroom was a cathedral of gold leaf and crystal, vibrating with the low hum of the city's elite. One Myung-Ok stood near the entrance, draped in black lace and arrogance, holding a glass of vintage champagne. She kept glancing at the door, a predatory smirk playing on her lips. She had told her friends to keep their phones ready. She wanted the exact moment the scrubbing girl walked in to be preserved forever as a trophy of her social dominance. She should be here any minute, Myung-Ok whispered to her circle, her eyes gleaming. I told her to wear her best. I can only imagine the polyester tragedy we're about to witness. Then, the heavy oak doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open. The room didn't just go quiet, it went cold. The air seemed to be sucked out of the ballroom as a vision in crimson appeared at the landing. It wasn't a maid in a Sunday dress. It was a storm. Antoinette G. Stuckey stood framed by the golden light of the foyer, her custom red gown flowing around her like liquid fire. The silk was structural perfection, moving with a heavy, expensive grace that whispered of Milanese ateliers and six-figure price tags. Around her neck, the Stuckey canary diamonds caught the light of the chandeliers, throwing fractured shards of yellow brilliance across the faces of the stunned onlookers. For a heartbeat, there was a collective intake of breath. Then, the flashbulbs began to detonate. The paparazzi, usually reserved for movie stars and heads of state, surged forward. They didn't recognize the maid, but they recognized the power. They recognized the unmistakable aura of a woman who didn't just belong in the room, but owned the building it was in. Antoinette began her descent. Every step was a masterclass in regal composure. She didn't look for Myung-Ok, she didn't have to. She kept her chin parallel to the floor, her eyes fixed on the center of the room with a terrifying, calm intensity. Myung-Ok's champagne glass trembled in her hand, the liquid sloshing against the rim. Her face, once twisted in a smirk, was now a mask of ashen disbelief. The woman walking toward her wasn't the invisible servant who polished her silver, this was a queen returning to her throne. As Antoinette reached the bottom of the stairs, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Sun Chan-wook stepped forward from the shadows of the bar, his tuxedo sharp, his expression unreadable to everyone but her. He didn't offer his hand to a servant, he bowed his head to a sovereign. The red storm had arrived, and as the cameras continued to hiss and pop, the guests began to whisper the name they had ignored for 3 months. The joke was over, and the social execution had begun. The silence following Antoinette's entrance was finally broken by a sharp, desperate sound. One Myung-Ok, her face a frantic shade of porcelain white, began to clap. It was a slow, mocking rhythm. She stepped toward the center of the room, her eyes darting to the guests as she tried to reclaim the narrative. She believed that no matter how Antoinette looked, she was still a servant who could be crushed by a single word. Myung-Ok projected, her voice amplified by the ballroom's acoustics as she reached for the cordless microphone on a nearby pedestal. It seems my little charity project took her instructions quite literally. I told her to come looking like actual people, and she's gone and spent her entire life savings on a costume. She turned to the crowd, looking for a supportive laugh that didn't come. Antoinette, dear, we appreciate the effort, but do be careful not to spill champagne on that rental. It would take you decades of scrubbing my floors to pay for it. Myung-Ok held the microphone out, a cruel glint in her eyes, expecting Antoinette to stutter or shrink back in shame. Instead, Antoinette stepped forward, her hand closing around the device with a grip that was calm and final. She didn't look at the crowd, she looked directly into Myung-Ok's soul. C'est un moment fascinant, n'est-ce pas? Antoinette began, her French flawless, elegant, and resonant. Certaines personnes pensent que la dignité s'acquitte, alors tu en réalité, elle se cultive par le respect qu'elle emporte aux autres. The room gasped. Antoinette didn't pause, her voice transitioning seamlessly into Mandarin. Women doji dao, jinjing de limao bushi togwen ni chuan shenmi, ursher ni rua duadai naxi ni rin shir kong darin. She spoke of true manners and the indivisibility of those deemed lesser, her tone melodic yet razor-sharp. Finally, she returned to English, her voice dropping into a register of pure, executive power. Mrs. Sun, you invited me here to see what real labor looks like. But what you've actually shown this room is what a hollow spirit looks like. You see a maid. I see a liability. And in my world, we don't humiliate liabilities, we liquidate them. Antoinette lowered the microphone, the feedback a low, ominous hum in the sudden vacuum of the room. The guests weren't laughing at the maid anymore. They were staring at Myung-Ok with a mixture of pity and horror. The Red Queen hadn't just spoken. She had dismantled the very foundation of Myung-Ok's social existence in 3 different tongues, leaving the Mafia wife standing in a spotlight of her own making, small, exposed, and utterly defeated. The silence following Antoinette's linguistic masterclass was heavy, a suffocating vacuum that Myung-Ok tried to fill with a panicked, high-pitched laugh. Languages? You learned a few phrases to impress us? How charming. But a maid in a red dress is still a maid. She turned to her husband, who stood like a statue of granite at the edge of the circle. Chanwook, tell her. Tell this woman to take off those stolen jewels and get back to the kitchen before I have her arrested. Sun Chanwook didn't move toward his wife. Instead, he stepped toward Antoinette and came to a halt exactly 1 pace behind her, his hands clasped respectfully behind his back. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Myung-Ok, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. You see, Antoinette isn't here to serve the appetizers. She is here to decide if our family is worth saving. Antoinette reached into the small, beaded clutch at her waist and pulled out a single, matte black business card with a gold-embossed crest. She didn't hand it to Myung-Ok, she let it fall onto the white tablecloth of the nearest VIP table. My name is Antoinette G. Stuckey, she said, and for the first time, her voice held the cold, industrial weight of a gavel. I am the majority shareholder of Stuckey Global. 2 weeks ago, I purchased the distressed debt of the Sun shipping empire from the secondary market. Currently, I hold 80% of your husband's outstanding liabilities. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The guests, many of whom were creditors or business rivals, looked at the card and then at the woman in red with newfound terror. They weren't looking at a joke anymore, they were looking at the person who could trigger a margin call that would erase the Sun name from the city by morning. Myung-Ok's face went from ashen to a ghostly, translucent gray. Her knees buckled slightly, her hand catching the edge of a chair to keep from collapsing. The merger. She whispered, her voice cracking. The venture capitalist from New York, that was you? I came here to see if the rumors of your husband's character were true, Antoinette said, stepping into Myung-Ok's personal space. The diamonds around Antoinette's neck flared like a warning signal. I found a man trying to build a legacy. But I also found a wife who treats human beings like disposable furniture. In my portfolio, I do not tolerate toxic leadership, at any level. Antoinette turned to Chan-wook, ignoring the woman trembling between them. The debt is currently in default, Mr. Sun. I have the legal right to seize the estate and the assets immediately. She looked back at Myung-Ok, her gaze as sharp as a diamond-tipped blade. I think the first thing I'll do with my new property is change the locks. You have exactly 1 hour to pack your designer bags. And Myung-Ok? Don't bother taking the silver. I know exactly how clean it's supposed to be. 6 months later, the Riverside Hotel ballroom was once again filled with the city's most influential figures, but the atmosphere had undergone a fundamental shift. Gone was the oppressive weight of elitism, in its place was an air of genuine purpose. This was the inaugural gala for the Bennett Sun Foundation, an organization dedicated to the protection and advancement of service industry workers. Antoinette stood on the balcony overlooking the event, wearing a gown of midnight blue that shimmered like a calm sea. Beside her, Sun Chan-wook looked out at the crowd, his expression more relaxed than it had ever been during the years of his wife's social reign. Below them, the guests were a diverse tapestry of CEOs and corporate leaders mingling with the very staff members who kept their industries running, now treated as honored stakeholders rather than invisible labor. I saw Minji earlier, Chan-wook said, glancing at Antoinette. She's finished her first semester of the management program your foundation funded. She's already being scouted for a junior operations role in our shipping division. Antoinette smiled, a warmth in her eyes that was never present during her undercover days. Dignity is the best investment we ever made, Chan-wook. When people are seen, they perform. When they are respected, they innovate. Chan-wook picked up 2 glasses of sparkling water from a passing tray, handing one to her. Myung-Ok sent a letter from the countryside last week. She's working in a community garden to fulfill her court-ordered service. She mentioned that for the first time in her life, she understands why the silver needs to be polished, because of the effort it takes to do it. Growth is a painful process, Antoinette mused, clinking her glass against his. But a necessary one. The music downstairs shifted to a celebratory tempo. The merger had been a staggering success, not just financially, but culturally. The Sun Empire was now a global benchmark for ethical business, and Antoinette G. Stuckey was no longer a ghost in the hallways. She was a partner, a visionary, and for the man standing beside her, something much more. Chan-wook turned to her, his voice dropping to a private, sincere level. To the Red Queen, he toasted. Who taught a king that his crown was worthless if he didn't care for the people at his feet? To the future, Antoinette replied, her gaze sweeping over the ballroom. Where no one is invisible, and every hand that works is a hand that is honored. As they drank to their new reign, a cheer erupted from the floor below. Mrs. Park, the head housekeeper who had once shared a meager meal with a maid named Antoinette, was being honored on stage. Antoinette leaned her head against Chan-wook's shoulder, watching the woman take her bow. The savage vindication was over, replaced by a legacy that would outlast them both, a world where character was the only currency that truly mattered.